Long before the pyramids rose, before Rome was founded, before even Homer sang of Troy, there was a story whispered in clay tablets beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. It is the story of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, the man who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, a ruler whose name has echoed across 5,000 years. Imagine that, a tale so old, it makes even your grandmother's bedtime stories look like breaking news. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just a myth, not just a legend, but the world's first great narrative, carved into cuneiform script by scribes who probably didn't realize they were writing humanity's earliest bestseller. It survived floods, wars, crumbling empires, and the occasional archaeologist with dusty fingers. And yet, here it is, still alive, still humming softly, like a lullaby of eternity. Why does this story matter? Because it asks the same questions we still ask today. What does it mean to be human? How do we face death? Can friendship change us? And perhaps most importantly, how far can one king push the gods before they push back? Gilgamesh's tale is not just about battles and quests. It is about the restless heart of humanity, always searching for meaning, always challenging limits. Picture yourself lying in bed, eyes heavy, listening to the slow rhythm of history. The walls of Uruk rise in your imagination. The gods stir in the heavens, and Gilgamesh himself steps forward, larger than life, ready to challenge eternity. The legend begins here, not with a bang, but with a whisper that has outlasted time itself. And now, before you drift off into dreams of ancient kings and sleepy gods, don't forget, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments from where you're watching, preferably somewhere cozy, with your blanket fortress fully operational. In the cradle of civilization, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates carved fertile lands into the heart of Mesopotamia, a child was born who would one day become the most legendary king of all. His name was Gilgamesh, and his birth was no ordinary event. The scribes tell us he was 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, a peculiar recipe that made him stronger than any man, yet still vulnerable to the fate that awaits all humans. Imagine being born with a cosmic math problem built into your DNA. It's like the gods couldn't quite decide whether to make him immortal or just really, really impressive. Gilgamesh's mother was the goddess Ninsan, wise and radiant, often called the Lady of the Wild Cows. His father, Lugalbanda, was a mortal king of Uruk, remembered for his courage and his devotion to the gods. From this union came a child destined to rule, a boy who would grow into a man whose strength was unmatched, whose ambition was boundless, and whose story would echo across millennia. From the very beginning, Gilgamesh was extraordinary. He was said to tower above others, his muscles like carved stone, his mind sharp, his will unyielding. He could run faster than the swiftest animals, lift weights that would crush ordinary men, and command attention wherever he walked. The people of Uruk looked upon him with awe, but also with unease. For when a child is born with the power of gods, mortals cannot help but wonder whether that power will be used for protection or for tyranny. The birth of Gilgamesh was not just the arrival of a king, but the beginning of a legend. His destiny was written not in ink, but in clay, pressed into tablets that would survive thousands of years. He was born into a world where gods walked among mortals, where myths were as real as the walls of Uruk, and where every king was measured not only by his strength, but by his relationship with the divine. And so, the baby Gilgamesh grew, nurtured by divine wisdom and mortal strength, destined to become the ruler of Uruk, the city of dazzling walls and sacred temples. His story was already unfolding, slowly, like the rivers that shaped his land. The people did not yet know whether he would be their protector or their burden. But they knew one thing: this was no ordinary king. To understand Gilgamesh, one must first understand the city he ruled. Uruk was not just a settlement of mud brick houses and dusty streets. It was the jewel of ancient Sumer, a city so magnificent that its walls were said to stretch for miles, gleaming under the Mesopotamian sun. Imagine a place where temples rose like mountains, where markets bustled with traders carrying goods from distant lands, and where the hum of civilization was as constant as the flowing rivers nearby. Uruk's walls were legendary, built with precision and strength. They stood as a symbol of permanence in a world where floods and wars could erase entire communities overnight. Travelers who approached the city were awed by its scale, its grandeur, and its sense of eternity. These walls were not just defenses. They were monuments to human ambition, reminders that mortals could carve their mark upon the earth. At the heart of Uruk stood the temple of Ina, dedicated to the goddess Ishtar. Its towers reached toward the heavens, its courtyards filled with offerings, its priests chanting hymns that echoed through the city. Religion was woven into every stone, every ritual, every breath of Uruk's people. The gods were not distant abstractions. They were present, watching, guiding, and sometimes punishing. To live in Uruk was to live under the gaze of the divine. The city was also a hub of trade and culture. Merchants carried lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, and copper from Oman. Farmers brought grain from the fertile fields, potters shaped clay into vessels, and scribes pressed cuneiform into tablets that recorded everything from taxes to poetry. Uruk was alive, vibrant, and restless, a place where humanity's earliest dreams of greatness took shape. Yet beneath its splendor lay tension. The people admired their city, but they feared their king. Gilgamesh demanded labor to build the walls higher, stronger, more enduring. He claimed rights that weighed heavily on families, and his ambition often overshadowed the needs of his people. Uruk was both a jewel and a burden, a city of glory and of grievance. Still, the city itself endured, shimmering in legend. To speak of Uruk is to speak of the dawn of civilization, of humanity's first great experiment in urban life. It was the stage upon which Gilgamesh's epic unfolded, the backdrop to his triumphs and his failures, the silent witness to his challenge against the gods. Uruk was not loud, not fleeting, but steady, eternal, and strangely soothing. Its walls hum softly in history, its temples glow in memory, and its story drifts like a lullaby through time, reminding us that even in the earliest days, humanity dreamed of greatness. As Gilgamesh grew into his role as king of Uruk, the brilliance of his divine strength became both a blessing and a burden. He was unmatched in power, towering above his people, his presence commanding awe. Yet with that strength came arrogance, and with arrogance came tyranny. The citizens of Uruk, who once admired their mighty ruler, began to whisper in fear, for Gilgamesh's rule was not tempered by humility, but driven by desire. He demanded labor from his people to build the walls of Uruk higher, stronger, more enduring. Day and night, men were pressed into service, carrying bricks, hauling stones, sweating under the relentless sun. The walls rose magnificently, but behind their grandeur lay the exhaustion of countless hands. Gilgamesh saw only the glory of his city, not the suffering of those who built it. His tyranny extended beyond labor. He claimed rights, entering marriages before husbands could, a practice that filled the people with sorrow and resentment. Families wept, lovers despaired, and the city's joy was dimmed by the shadow of its king. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine, seemed untouchable, his will unchallenged, his appetite unchecked. The gods themselves grew restless at his behavior. Kings were meant to protect, to guide, to balance the needs of mortals with the will of the divine. Gilgamesh, however, ruled as though he were above both mortals and gods. His tyranny was not loud in battle, but steady in oppression, a slow grinding of his people's spirit beneath the weight of his ambition. Yet even in his tyranny there was greatness. The walls of Uruk stood as monuments to human achievement. The temples gleamed, the city thrived in trade and culture. Gilgamesh's vision was vast, his ambition boundless. He was not a petty tyrant, but a colossal one, shaping his city into a jewel, even as he drained the strength of its people. The tyrant king is remembered not only for his cruelty, but for the lesson he taught, that power without balance becomes a burden, that strength without humility becomes tyranny. His reign set the stage for the gods to intervene, for balance to be restored, for a rival to be created who would challenge him and, in doing so, change him forever. Uruk, under Gilgamesh, was both magnificent and weary, a city of glory and grievance. Its walls hummed with pride, its people whispered with sorrow, and its king stood at the center, radiant, terrible, and strangely soothing in the rhythm of history. The cries of the people of Uruk rose up to the heavens, carried on the winds of Mesopotamia. They had endured the strength and arrogance of Gilgamesh, their king, who demanded too much, who claimed too many rights, who ruled with power beyond control. The gods, listening from their lofty thrones, decided that balance must be restored. And so, in their divine council, they conceived a plan to create a rival equal to Gilgamesh, a being who could match his strength, challenge his arrogance, and perhaps teach him humility. From clay and the breath of life, the gods shaped Enkidu. He was not born in a palace, nor raised among nobles, but formed in the wilderness. His body was covered in hair, his hands rough, his spirit untamed. He lived among animals, drank from rivers, ate grass with gazelles, and ran with the herds. He was the wild man, the mirror opposite of Gilgamesh, a creature of nature rather than civilization. Enkidu's presence was both strange and soothing. He was strong enough to tear down traps set by hunters, wise enough to live in harmony with beasts, yet innocent of human ways. The people who encountered him were astonished, whispering of a man who seemed more beast than king, more free than ruler. His existence was a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of Gilgamesh, a reminder that strength could be found outside the walls of Uruk. The gods did not create Enkidu to destroy Gilgamesh, but to balance him. Where Gilgamesh was polished by civilization, Enkidu was raw with wilderness. Where Gilgamesh was arrogant, Enkidu was innocent. Where Gilgamesh ruled with command, Enkidu lived with freedom. Together, they would form a harmony that neither could achieve alone. The creation of Enkidu was not loud, not glorious, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It was the gods' gentle answer to the cries of Uruk, a bedtime reminder that even kings need companions, and that balance is the rhythm of eternity. The gods had shaped Enkidu from clay, a wild man who roamed the open plains, drank from rivers, and lived among gazelles. His strength was immense, his spirit untamed, and his innocence untouched by the ways of civilization. Yet destiny was already weaving its threads, pulling him toward Uruk, toward the king who ruled with arrogance and power beyond control. The people of Uruk, weary under Gilgamesh's tyranny, saw in Enkidu a hope. Hunters who encountered him were astonished by his ability to tear down traps and free animals, his defiance of human order. Word spread quickly, and soon Gilgamesh himself heard whispers of a man as strong as he, a rival who might finally match his might. The stage was set for a meeting that would change both their lives. When Enkidu entered Uruk, the city stirred. He was wild, rough, covered in hair, his presence more beast than man. Yet his eyes carried strength, his body radiated power. Gilgamesh, curious and proud, confronted him. The two clashed immediately, wrestling with the force of storms, shaking the very foundations of the city. Their struggle was not just physical, but cosmic. A contest between civilization and wilderness, arrogance and innocence, king and wild man. The battle raged, but neither could defeat the other. Gilgamesh, accustomed to victory, found himself matched blow for blow. Enkidu, untamed yet noble, discovered in Gilgamesh a rival worthy of respect. Slowly, the struggle softened into recognition. Their contest became the seed of friendship, forged in sweat and strength, born from equality. The people of Uruk watched in awe. Their tyrant king had finally met his equal, and in that meeting, something shifted. Gilgamesh's arrogance began to waver. Enkidu's wildness began to tame, and together they formed a bond that would carry them through adventures greater than either could face alone. The meeting of the wild man and the king was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It was the gods' answer to the cries of Uruk, a bedtime reminder that even the strongest need companionship, and that balance is the rhythm of eternity. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu finally stood face to face, the air in Uruk seemed to tremble. The people gathered, whispering, wondering if the wild man could truly match their king. Gilgamesh, radiant with divine strength, and Enkidu, raw with the power of nature, collided like thunder meeting the earth. Their struggle was immense, shaking the very foundations of the city. A contest that seemed less like two men wrestling and more like cosmic forces testing each other. The battle was long, neither yielding, neither faltering. Gilgamesh, accustomed to victory, found himself stunned by Enkidu's resilience. Enkidu, untamed and free, discovered in Gilgamesh a rival who was not only strong but relentless. Blow after blow, grapple after grapple, the two pressed against each other until exhaustion softened their fury. What began as a clash of equals slowly transformed into recognition. In that recognition, something remarkable happened. Gilgamesh, who had ruled with arrogance, saw in Enkidu not an enemy but a companion. Enkidu, who had lived in wilderness, saw in Gilgamesh not a tyrant but a brother. Their battle ended not with defeat but with friendship, forged in sweat, strength, and equality. The people of Uruk, who had feared their king's unchecked power, now saw hope in this bond. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu became inseparable. They laughed, they planned, they dreamed of adventures beyond the walls of Uruk. Their friendship was not loud, not fleeting, but steady, eternal, and strangely soothing. It was the gods' design fulfilled, balance restored, arrogance tempered, wilderness civilized. The battle of equals was more than a fight. It was the birth of companionship, the moment when two men discovered that strength is greatest when shared. Their friendship would carry them into forests guarded by monsters, into battles against divine wrath, into quests that challenged the very order of the cosmos. And so, the wild man and the king walked side by side, their bond humming softly in history. A bedtime reminder that even the strongest need a friend, and that true power lies not in domination but in unity. With their friendship forged in the heat of battle, Gilgamesh and Enkidu turned their eyes beyond the walls of Uruk. The city was magnificent, but the restless hearts of the two companions longed for adventure, for deeds that would echo across eternity. And so they set their sights on the cedar forest, a sacred realm guarded by Humbaba, a monstrous servant of the gods. To slay Humbaba was not merely to defeat a beast, but to challenge divine authority itself. The journey began slowly, like the steady rhythm of footsteps across the plains. Gilgamesh, radiant with ambition, spoke of glory and fame. Enkidu, wise in the ways of nature, warned of danger, of the wrath of the gods, of the sacredness of the forest. Yet together they pressed forward, their bond stronger than fear, their determination greater than caution. They prayed to Shamash, the sun god, seeking guidance and protection. Shamash answered with dreams, visions of victory, whispers of encouragement carried on beams of light. Each night Gilgamesh dreamed, and each morning Enkidu interpreted, steadying his friend's courage, reminding him that even kings must listen to omens. The people of Uruk watched their departure with awe and dread. Their king, once a tyrant, now walked beside a friend, venturing into realms unknown. The journey was long, filled with deserts that burned, mountains that loomed, rivers that stretched endlessly. Yet Gilgamesh and Enkidu pressed on, their laughter echoing in the wilderness, their friendship carrying them through exhaustion. The cedar forest awaited, vast and fragrant, its trees towering like pillars of eternity. Humbaba, the guardian, breathed terror into the air, his face twisted, his roar shaking the earth. The gods had appointed him to protect the forest, to keep mortals from trespassing into sacred realms. To challenge him was to challenge the gods themselves. The journey to slay Humbaba was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It was the slow unfolding of destiny, the steady march of two friends into danger. A bedtime reminder that courage is born not from arrogance, but from companionship, and that even the greatest challenges can be faced when strength is shared. The journey of Gilgamesh and Enkidu led them at last to the edge of the cedar forest, a place unlike any other in the ancient world. The forest was vast, its trees towering like pillars that seemed to hold up the sky itself. The air was thick with fragrance, the scent of cedar drifting like incense, calming yet ominous. This was no ordinary woodland. It was sacred, appointed by the gods as a realm beyond mortal reach. Guarding this forest was Humbaba, a creature of immense terror. His face was said to twist like storm clouds, his roar to shake the earth, his breath to scorch the air. The gods had chosen him as protector, a sentinel who ensured that mortals would not trespass into divine territory. To enter the cedar forest was to defy the gods, and to challenge Humbaba was to risk their wrath. Gilgamesh, driven by ambition, spoke of glory and fame. He wanted the cedar wood to build monuments, to leave behind works that would outlast his mortal life. Enkidu, wiser in the ways of nature, trembled at the thought of confronting Humbaba. He warned his friend of the danger, of the sacredness of the forest, of the punishment that might follow. Yet together they pressed forward, their bond stronger than fear, their courage greater than caution. The forest itself seemed alive, its shadows deep, its silence heavy. Every step echoed with the weight of destiny. Gilgamesh prayed to Shamash, the sun god, who sent dreams of reassurance, visions of victory. Enkidu interpreted these dreams, steadying his companion's resolve, reminding him that even kings must listen to omens. When Humbaba appeared, the ground shook. His presence was overwhelming, his voice thunderous, his power immense. The battle that followed was not just a clash of strength, but a contest of will, of mortal defiance against divine order. With the aid of Shamash, Gilgamesh, and Enkidu struck Humbaba down, felling the guardian and cutting into the sacred forest. Victory was theirs, but it carried weight. The gods had appointed Humbaba, and his death was no small act. The cedar trees fell, the forest echoed with silence, and the companions stood amidst both triumph and foreboding. They had won glory, but they had also invited the gaze of the gods, who do not forget defiance. The cedar forest was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. Its story drifts like a bedtime reminder that ambition can lead mortals into sacred realms, that courage can overcome guardians, but that every victory carries consequences in the rhythm of eternity. The triumph of Gilgamesh and Enkidu over Humbaba echoed through Uruk like thunder. The cedar trees had fallen, the guardian had been slain, and the people marveled at their king's courage. Yet victory carries weight, and the gods do not forget defiance. Among them, Ishtar, goddess of love and war, turned her gaze upon Gilgamesh. Ishtar was radiant, powerful, and unpredictable. She looked upon Gilgamesh and desired him, offering her love, her divine favor, her gifts of prosperity. She promised him riches, kingdoms, and glory beyond imagination. But Gilgamesh, bold and mocking, refused her. He listed the fates of her past lovers, each ruined, each destroyed by her wrath. His rejection was not only personal but cosmic, a challenge to the goddess herself. Ishtar's fury was swift. She ascended to the heavens, her voice trembling with rage, demanding vengeance from her father Anu. She cried out for the bull of heaven, a creature of immense destruction, to be unleashed upon Uruk. The gods hesitated, knowing the devastation it would bring, but Ishtar's wrath was relentless. The bull was sent, its hooves shaking the earth, its breath scorching the land, its presence a terror to mortals. The people of Uruk trembled as the bull of heaven descended. Fields cracked, rivers dried, and men fell beneath its fury. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, however, stood together. Their bond, forged in battle and friendship, carried them through the storm. They fought the bull with courage, striking blow after blow, until at last it fell, defeated by mortal hands. Ishtar, humiliated, stood upon the walls of Uruk, cursing Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Her wrath had been answered with defiance, her vengeance undone by friendship. Yet the gods watched, and their counsel stirred. For to slay the bull of heaven was no small act, and the price of such defiance would soon be demanded. The wrath of Ishtar was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It drifts through history like a bedtime reminder that even gods can be challenged, that love can turn to fury, and that every victory carries the weight of consequence in the rhythm of eternity. The triumph over the bull of heaven was celebrated in Uruk, but the gods were not pleased. To slay Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, and then to kill the bull of heaven, a divine beast sent by Ishtar herself, was too much defiance for mortals to bear without consequence. The council of gods gathered, and in their judgment, one of the two companions must pay the price. They chose Enkidu. The wild man, once untamed and free, began to weaken. His body, once strong enough to wrestle kings and beasts, grew heavy with illness. Dreams haunted him, visions of the underworld where shadows wandered and dust was the food of souls. He saw the fate of mortals, the endless halls of silence, the eternal gloom that awaited all who died. His heart trembled, for he knew his time was near. Gilgamesh watched helplessly as his friend faded. The bond they had forged in battle, the laughter they had shared, the adventures they had undertaken, all began to dissolve in the shadow of death. Enkidu cursed the day he was taken from the wilderness, cursed the trapper who first saw him, cursed the temple woman who brought him into civilization. Yet even in his bitterness, he remembered Gilgamesh, and his curses softened into sorrow. The people of Uruk mourned, for Enkidu had become more than a rival to their king. He was a companion, a balance, a reminder that even kings need friends. His death was slow, drawn out, filled with visions and laments. Gilgamesh, who had never known defeat, now faced a loss greater than any battle. His grief was immense, his cries echoing through the city, his heart shattered by the inevitability of mortality. Enkidu's death was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing in its rhythm. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that friendship is the greatest gift, that loss is the deepest wound, and that even the strongest must bow to the silence of eternity. The wrath of Ishtar did not fade with curses shouted from the walls of Uruk. Her fury demanded action, and so the bull of heaven was unleashed upon the earth. This creature was no ordinary beast. It was a divine terror, born of celestial power, its hooves shaking the ground, its breath scorching the land, its presence enough to unravel the order of mortals. When the bull descended, the city trembled. Fields cracked beneath its steps, rivers dried in its wake, and men fell in droves, unable to withstand its fury. The people of Uruk cried out, their voices rising like smoke, for they knew this was no battle they could fight alone. Only Gilgamesh and Enkidu, bound by friendship and courage, could stand against such a force. Together they faced the bull. Gilgamesh, radiant with ambition, struck with the strength of kingship. Enkidu, raw with wilderness, fought with the power of nature itself. Their blows landed with precision, their movements in harmony, their bond unshaken even in the face of divine wrath. Slowly, steadily, they weakened the beast, until at last it fell, defeated by mortal hands. The people rejoiced, but the gods watched with unease. To slay the bull of heaven was no small act. It was defiance against divine authority, a challenge to the balance of the cosmos. Ishtar, humiliated, cursed the companions, her rage echoing through the heavens. The council of gods stirred, and the price of victory began to take shape. The bull of heaven was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing in its rhythm. Its fall hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that even divine beasts can be overcome by friendship, but that every triumph carries consequences in the eternal balance of gods and men. The death of Enkidu was a wound deeper than any battle scar. Gilgamesh, who had once stood radiant and unshaken, now wandered through Uruk in grief. His cries echoed through the streets, his sorrow poured into the temples, his heart shattered by the silence of his friend. For the first time, the mighty king confronted a truth he could not wrestle, could not conquer: death. Gilgamesh's despair was immense. He tore his garments, covered himself in dust, and refused the comforts of his palace. The arrogance that had once defined him dissolved into fear, for he realized that if Enkidu, strong and loyal, could fall to death, then so too would he. The thought of his own mortality consumed him, gnawed at his spirit, and drove him into restless wandering. He could not accept that life ended in silence. He could not bear the thought of his body returning to dust, of his name fading into oblivion. And so Gilgamesh resolved to search for immortality. His grief became a quest, his despair a journey. He would travel beyond the known world, cross deserts and mountains, rivers and seas, to find the secret of eternal life. The people of Uruk watched their king depart, weary and broken. They saw not the tyrant who had once demanded labor, nor the hero who had slain Humbaba and the bull of heaven, but a man haunted by loss, driven by fear, desperate for answers. His journey was not for glory, not for conquest, but for escape, escape from the fate that binds all mortals. Gilgamesh's despair was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing in its rhythm. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that even kings must face mortality, that grief can drive us to seek impossible answers, and that the search for immortality is as old as humanity itself. Grief had hollowed Gilgamesh, and despair had driven him from the walls of Uruk. With Enkidu gone, the mighty king could no longer bear the silence of mortality. His heart, once filled with arrogance, now trembled with fear, and so he set out on a journey unlike any other, a quest to find the secret of eternal life, a path that led him far beyond the earthly realm. The deserts stretched endlessly before him, their sands burning beneath the sun. Gilgamesh wandered, weary and broken, his body covered in dust, his spirit consumed by longing. He crossed mountains that loomed like giants, rivers that roared with fury, and lands where no mortal dared to tread. Each step carried him farther from Uruk, farther from the comfort of his people, deeper into the unknown. He encountered scorpion men at the gates of the mountains, their bodies half human, half beast, their eyes glowing with fire. They guarded the path to the realm of the gods, a place where mortals were not meant to walk. Yet Gilgamesh, desperate and determined, pleaded for passage. His grief was so profound, his resolve so unyielding, that even the guardians allowed him through, marveling at the sorrow that drove him onward. The journey was long, filled with hunger, exhaustion, and silence. Gilgamesh wandered through tunnels of darkness where the sun never shone, where shadows pressed against him like heavy cloth. He traveled for days without light, his mind drifting between despair and hope, his body trembling with fatigue. Yet he pressed forward, guided by the faint memory of Enkidu's laughter, driven by the fear of his own mortality. At last, he reached the edge of the world, where the waters of death lay. Here he sought the ferryman, Urshanabi, who alone could guide him across. Gilgamesh, weary and broken, begged for help, offering his strength, his sorrow, his desperation. Urshanabi, moved by the king's grief, agreed to lead him, though the journey across the waters was perilous, requiring courage and endurance beyond measure. The long journey beyond the earthly realm was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that grief can drive us into unknown lands, that despair can lead us to seek impossible answers, and that even kings must wander through darkness in search of light. Across the waters of death, Gilgamesh finally reached the dwelling of Utnapishtim, the one mortal who had been granted eternal life. His journey had been long, his body weary, his spirit broken, but his hope remained. He sought from Utnapishtim the secret of immortality, the answer to the grief that haunted him since Enkidu's death. Utnapishtim welcomed him not with glory but with silence, for the gift he carried was heavy. He told Gilgamesh the story of the Great Flood, a tale older than kings, older than empires, older than the walls of Uruk itself. The gods, angered by humanity's noise and arrogance, had decided to destroy mankind. But Ea, the god of wisdom, whispered to Utnapishtim, instructing him to build a great boat. The boat was vast, sealed with pitch, filled with animals, treasures, and family. When the flood came, it raged for days, swallowing mountains, drowning cities, silencing the world. Humanity was undone, save for Utnapishtim and those aboard his vessel. When the waters receded, the gods regretted their fury, and in their council they granted Utnapishtim and his wife eternal life, setting them apart from mortals forever. Gilgamesh listened, his heart trembling. The flood story was not just a tale of destruction, but a reminder of divine power, of humanity's fragility, of the rare gift of immortality. Yet, Utnapishtim's secret was not one that could be given freely. Eternal life was not a prize to be won, not a treasure to be stolen, but a burden carried by one chosen man. The flood story was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that the gods hold the balance of life and death, that immortality is not meant for all, and that even kings must listen to the rhythm of eternity. Gilgamesh, weary from his journey and desperate for answers, listened as Utnapishtim revealed the truth. Immortality, the gift Gilgamesh sought, was not a prize to be won through strength or courage. It was a burden, granted only once, in the aftermath of the Great Flood, when the gods regretted their destruction and chose to spare Utnapishtim and his wife. Eternal life was not meant for mortals. It was an exception, not a rule. Utnapishtim tested Gilgamesh, asking him to conquer sleep, the brother of death. If he could resist sleep, perhaps he could resist mortality. But Gilgamesh, exhausted from his journey, fell into slumber almost immediately. Days passed, and when he awoke, he realized that even kings cannot escape the simplest truth. Mortals must rest, mortals must fade, mortals must die. Yet Utnapishtim, moved by Gilgamesh's grief, offered him a secret. At the bottom of the waters lay a plant, thorny yet radiant, a gift that could restore youth. It was not immortality, but it was renewal, a chance to push back against the march of time. Gilgamesh, filled with hope, dove into the waters, retrieved the plant, and carried it with joy, dreaming of sharing it with the elders of Uruk. But fate is relentless. As Gilgamesh rested on his journey home, a serpent crept forth, drawn by the scent of the plant. It devoured the gift, shedding its skin as a sign of renewal, leaving Gilgamesh empty-handed. The king wept, for the secret of eternal life had slipped away, stolen by nature itself. The truth about eternal life was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that immortality is not for mortals, that even kings must bow to the rhythm of time, and that renewal belongs not to man but to the cycles of nature. Empty-handed and weary, Gilgamesh turned back toward Uruk. The plant of renewal had been stolen by the serpent. The secret of immortality had slipped beyond his grasp, and the truth of mortality weighed heavy upon him. His journey, filled with deserts, mountains, darkness, and despair, had ended not with eternal life, but with understanding. As he approached the city, the walls of Uruk rose before him, gleaming in the sunlight. They were strong, enduring, built by countless hands, a monument to human ambition. Gilgamesh paused, gazing at them, and in that moment he realized that immortality was not found in plants or secrets, but in the works left behind, in the stories carried forward, in the memory of a people. He entered Uruk not as the arrogant tyrant who had once demanded too much, nor as the grieving wanderer consumed by despair, but as a king tempered by loss. His heart carried the memory of Enkidu, his friend whose laughter had once filled the wilderness, whose death had taught him the weight of mortality. That memory became his guide, shaping his rule, softening his arrogance, deepening his humanity. The people of Uruk saw their king return, changed. He spoke not of eternal life, but of legacy, not of defiance against the gods, but of harmony with the rhythm of existence. He pointed to the walls, to the temples, to the city itself, reminding them that these were the marks of humanity, the monuments that endure beyond any single life. The return to Uruk was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that immortality lies not in escaping death, but in the stories we leave behind, in the works we build, and in the friendships that echo through eternity. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk with empty hands, the plant of renewal lost to the serpent, the secret of immortality forever beyond his grasp. Yet in that loss, a deeper truth began to unfold. He stood upon the walls of his city, gazing at the temples, the markets, the homes, and the people who filled them, and he understood the meaning of life was not to escape death, but to live in such a way that death could never erase what had been built. The death of Enkidu had taught him grief. His journey to Utnapishtim had taught him futility. But his return to Uruk taught him wisdom. Mortality was not a curse, but a rhythm, the steady beat of existence, the reminder that every life is precious because it ends. To be mortal is to love fiercely, to build enduring works, to leave behind stories that echo through generations. Gilgamesh realized that immortality lies not in the body, but in legacy. The walls of Uruk, strong and enduring, were his monument. The tales of his adventures, whispered by storytellers, were his eternal life. His friendship with Enkidu, though ended in death, lived on in memory, shaping him into a king who ruled with humility rather than arrogance. The meaning of mortality was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It hums softly in history, a bedtime reminder that death gives life its shape, that endings give beginnings their beauty, and that even kings must bow to the silence of eternity, leaving behind not despair, but stories that never fade. Gilgamesh stood once more upon the walls of Uruk, gazing at the city he had built. The stones rose high, strong and enduring, a monument to human ambition and labor. He realized that though he could not escape death, he had already achieved a kind of immortality. His legacy was not in eternal life, but in the works that would outlast him, in the stories that would be told long after his body had returned to dust. The people of Uruk remembered him not only as the tyrant who once demanded too much, but as the king who had changed. His friendship with Enkidu softened his arrogance, his grief deepened his humanity, and his journey taught him wisdom. He became a ruler who understood that true greatness lies not in domination, but in the balance between strength and compassion. The walls of Uruk, the temples, the markets, the laughter of its people, these became Gilgamesh's legacy. His adventures, whispered by storytellers, carried his name across generations. His struggles against Humbaba, his defiance of Ishtar, his grief for Enkidu, his search for immortality, all became part of the epic that hums softly through history. The legacy of Gilgamesh was not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It reminds us that mortality gives life its meaning, that friendship gives strength its purpose, and that the stories we leave behind are the true monuments of eternity. The story of Gilgamesh drifts to its end, like the slow fading of a dream. He was a king who ruled with arrogance, who demanded too much, who pressed his people into labor and claimed rights that were not his. He was a tyrant, radiant and terrible. Yet he was also a seeker, a dreamer, a man who dared to challenge the gods themselves. With Enkidu, his equal and his friend, he ventured into forbidden forests, slew guardians appointed by heaven, and defied Ishtar's wrath. Together they fought beasts born of divine fury, and together they laughed, dreamed, and shared the bond that gave meaning to their strength. But when Enkidu fell to death, Gilgamesh's heart broke, and his arrogance dissolved into grief. His journey for immortality carried him across deserts, mountains, and waters of death. He sought Utnapishtim, heard the story of the flood, and learned that eternal life was not meant for mortals. He found a plant of renewal, only to lose it to a serpent, and in that loss he discovered the truth. Immortality lies not in escaping death, but in the legacy we leave behind. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, changed. He stood upon its walls, gazed at its temples, and understood that his city, his people, and his story were his true monument. He had challenged the gods, defied beasts, and wandered through despair, but in the end he found wisdom. His tale hums softly through history, reminding us that even kings must bow to mortality, and that the meaning of life is found in friendship, in memory, and in the works that endure. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not loud, not fleeting, but shadowed, eternal, and strangely soothing. It drifts like a lullaby across the ages, a bedtime reminder that strength fades, but stories remain, that death silences, but legacy speaks, and that even the mightiest king is, at heart, a mortal searching for meaning. And so the tale closes, gently, like the turning of a page in the night. The king who challenged the gods rests now in memory, his story echoing softly in the rhythm of eternity. Good night.